Starting at guard, a noun, a group acting together as a whole to achieve greatness. Collective. At forward, a noun, the game of skill, speed, and strategy played on the hardwood, and the conflict at the center of a galactic showdown between cartoons and aliens. Basketball! And anchoring the paint, a noun, a negotiated understanding between parties. From peace treaties to pick and rolls, human beings must reach them before turning ideas into reality. Agreements! And now, your host of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast from Syracuse, New York, journalist, lawyer, business person, brother, son, and friend, Joe Manganiello!
Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. Rainy day here in Austin. It's late March. This episode's going to go up in early April. Today we're talking about 6 Eastern Conference teams. If you listened to last week's episode, we left off with the Brooklyn Nets. We talked about Atlanta, Boston, and Brooklyn, 3 very different teams. The Eastern Conference is full of it. Full of the good, full of the bad, full of the mediocre. Or maybe to be a little bit more charitable to Atlanta, the average. You know, there is a glut of teams in the Eastern Conference where we're not exactly sure what direction they're going in. Are they going backward, forward? Are they running in place? And today we'll have a few more of those teams. I do want to get started by saying if you're more inclined for the WNBA or we're excited about how I opened the CBA podcast with 13 episodes previewing, or rather recapping, the WNBA free agency period ahead of April's draft and, of course, the 2025 season starting in May. I'd be happy to solicit some questions, mailbag style. You know, would be happy to incorporate some WNBA topics into the beginning or end of some of these NBA episodes. We're going to have another 4 weeks of NBA content exclusively, as my goal here was to cast a wide net and get started with episodes devoted to all 30 NBA teams as well as all 13 WNBA teams. And so in the meantime, would be happy to mix in some requested WNBA topics. And then, you know, as the show really gets off the ground in May and June this summer, episodes are going to be more of a mixture, more about responding to what I considered to be the biggest topics in the business of basketball with a future eye, a visionary eye. And so that's going to be a mix of WNBA, maybe even some collegiate athletics, news updates where relevant, maybe some topics about Europe. NBA seems to be really excited about the idea of expanding into Europe, maybe even more so than expansion. So, you know, in general, you can write me always. You know, my Gmail address is public, joemags32@gmail.com. But feel free to leave comments on my YouTube channel, Collective Basketball Agreements, @thatjoemags. You can, of course, write to me via Substack or respond to my Substack emails. And please, if you're not already subscribed, you can subscribe and rate the podcast on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon, on a whole bunch of platforms. So thank you for your support. Hopefully you are enjoying the CBA podcast so far and sharing with all of your hoop-related friendships and relationships. Let's get started with the Charlotte Hornets. This is a franchise that has been stuck in the wilderness in no uncertain terms. They have not had a particularly relevant NBA team in quite some time. I mean, the Kemba Walker Charlotte Hornets from about a decade ago were close. You know, they were close. I don't know that they, off the top of my head, I don't even know that they won a meaningful playoff series during the Kemba Walker era. Of course, Kemba, a beloved basketball character because of his college basketball experience at UConn. And I think in general, Charlotte Hornets during the Michael Jordan ownership era, rightly or wrongly, I think were associated with fetishizing college basketball, American college basketball, and not maybe in the way that would have been most fruitful either, right? Because, we're sort of in the post one and done era, or in some ways maybe it's a redux or a 2.0 of the one and done era. We're seeing more and more high level prospects go to the Division I men's basketball ranks. Even from Europe, we're seeing a lot of European prospects going to America a year ahead of the draft, playing college basketball. Go figure. Lucrative name, image, and likeness rights are making it more appealing than ever before to spend about 6 months on campus somewhere. You're the coolest person on campus. You're winning basketball games. You're getting sponsorship. You're getting noticed. You're rubbing elbows with NBA alumni and NCAA alumni, getting indoctrinated into the American basketball culture. And that's actually, I think, an interesting place to start with the Charlotte Hornets, because presently their franchise player, LaMelo Ball, is one of the more high-profile examples of a player within the last decade who decided not to go to an American university for a single season. He was a 5-star prospect, famous. His last name was already famous in the basketball world. And he played a year in Australia. It was a mixed bag of results. I think, if anything, there were more hesitations with LaMelo Ball in his ability to be a floor general and a serious NBA point guard. And maybe if he played a different position, maybe if he was a wing or a forward, there wouldn't be as much scrutiny. But the idea that you're going to turn the keys to your franchise over to a point guard like LaMelo, very flashy, very stylish on the court, unafraid to pull up from 30 plus feet, unafraid to launch a floater from 15 to 18 feet. I mean, there's some weirdness to his game that doesn't immediately translate or obviously translate to wins. Now, I was very, very high on LaMelo Ball. If you go back to the Suits and Sidelines podcast with Arun Tatakara and me, back in the 2020 NBA draft, LaMelo Ball was my number one prospect with a bullet. I thought that Minnesota should have taken LaMelo over Anthony Edwards. I might have even preferred Tyrese Halliburton over Anthony Edwards, which more and more with every passing year, I think that conversation is pretty interesting, actually. Ant Edwards versus Halliburton. I wish I had really stuck to my guns and at least predicted Halliburton as the number one pick if I was going to say Ant Edwards didn't deserve it, because in many respects, I'm just wrong about that. Minnesota did a great job grabbing a two-way terror, someone with legitimate Michael Jordan comparisons, and certainly the look and the feel and the tenacity and the strength of a Michael Jordan clone, so to speak, at the shooting guard position, and former elite running back out of the state of Georgia, one of the great athletes in the NBA today. So nothing wrong with that pick. And Charlotte coming away with LaMelo Ball with the number 3 selection. Famously, Golden State takes James Wiseman over LaMelo Ball. And here we are. LaMelo Ball in his mid-20s, and the Charlotte Hornets not in the mid-20s for wins. As of March 24th, 18-53, 14th in the NBA's Eastern Conference, projecting to be a top 5 draft pick unless they get colossally bad luck with the lottery ping pong balls. According to Cleaning the Glass, their expected wins per 82 games, only 20.8. Offensive rating of 108. That's 29th in the NBA. Not good. That means they're scoring 1.08 points per possession. If you break it down to a per possession basis, so that's what, like a free throw is your average result on a possession. 1 out of 2 free throws is your average result. Not good. Defensive rating, not much better. 116.7. That's 24th in the NBA. That all adds up to a negative 8.7 net rating, 28th in the NBA. This has been, point blank period, one of the worst teams in the NBA. And it's been leading this way. I mean, they've been slightly better than that in recent years, but They came into the season as one of the worst teams. There was some people kind of late in the process who were saying, you know what, someone's got to make the play-in out of the East, and maybe Charlotte isn't a good pick for the 7th or 8th seed, or even to win the play-in and make the final playoff bracket. But to make the 9th seed, to make the 10th seed in the East is going to be really easy this year. And that is true. But Charlotte was worse than that. And they had some unforeseen issues. Brandon Miller in year 2 just not able to stay on the court as much as you would like. Mark Williams still struggling to put a full season together. LaMelo Ball is not the poster boy of health and, doesn't play as often as you would like when you look at his career holistically. Before I get into the financial fundamentals, let me just rattle the stat off. Mark Williams, LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller have managed to appear in the same game just 18 times over the past 2 seasons. This is ostensibly your starting point guard, your starting shooting guard, your starting center, your core moving forward. And they played 18 games over 2 seasons. Not good. Not good. Financially speaking, the Charlotte Hornets have 12 contracts under team control for next year, so they definitely have the ability to bring most of this group back. They have 2 cap holds on the books. Seth Curry, Taj Gibson, veteran type, so not a huge priority. They would be veteran minimum guys anyway. So really, the most interesting thing about their cap sheet for the summer of 2025 is the restricted free agency of Trey Mann and whether or not they want to make some large trades. And then, of course, we'll see where their first-round pick ends up. A top 5 pick is going to be more or less about a $10 million salary next year, but they're going to have the ability to take that on, even though they project to have a team slightly over the salary cap. Likely cap space is going to be, they're going to be like $11 million over the salary cap, but they're about $22 million below the tax. They should be able to build out a full roster without having any tax implications. Keep that luxury tax money coming year over year, right, Charlotte? Small market team, right? You got to take that money. You got to take that money from Boston. You got to take that money from Golden State. Let's go here next, because I do think that before we get into the weeds with Charlotte, their offseason almost looked a bit different because Mark Williams was going to be traded to the Los Angeles Lakers, but for the Lakers rescinding the trade after what they perceived to be a failed physical. And that was a controversial action by the Lakers. It's not something that we see very often because, politically speaking, when 2 teams come to an agreement in a trade and the agents for those players are notified and the agents notify their clients that they're getting traded, and then the players take physicals, and that can take a couple days to finalize. And then you're booking travel and you're going to show up to a new place. And hey, is my family going to need to rent an apartment for the rest of the season in my new city? The fans obviously have their reaction. Both ownership groups are involved. Sponsors may or may not be involved. Public relations. I mean, right? Trades touch every corner of the sports franchise business. And for the Lakers to call the league and say, actually, you know what? Nah, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this trade. That is a very controversial decision. And I'll even go this far. Other than maybe like the New York Knicks and James Dolan, like the Lakers are the biggest target in the NBA. They're one of the 2 biggest cities and biggest markets. They're a landmark franchise in the NBA. For them to pull the plug on this deal and screw Charlotte the way they did, and you could argue the Lakers screwed themselves because now they don't really have an adequate center position. They don't really have an adequate big man rotation going into the playoffs. But this is only the first year of the Luka Doncic era. LeBron James looks like he could be about this good for another 3 seasons if he wants to. And I think it's the 2026 title run that probably is the target in mind for the LeBron James camp and the Lakers management on this one, in respect to building a title contender around Luka and LeBron. I don't know that 2027 and beyond, the Lakers are counting on LeBron being there. And then alternatively, I don't think the Lakers thought of themselves as serious title contenders this year, the way OKC's playing. Jokic is still in his prime. Golden State added Jimmy Butler, and there are other teams ahead of them in the standings in the West. In other words, I think they just decided, you know what? Mark Williams really doesn't matter for the 2025 playoffs. Let's get those first-round picks back, and we'll try again on the trade market this summer. We'll take back our rookie forward, Dalton Knecht, who we like, who is actually back with a vengeance and playing pretty well for the Lakers. As a reminder, that trade, so Knecht, a 2030 pick swap, and the Lakers' 2031 first-round pick, unprotected. As a reminder, they traded their 2029 first-round pick unprotected to Dallas in the Luka trade. And as anyone who follows the NBA trade world knew for, if not years, months, the Lakers had 2 first-round picks they could trade, 29 and 2031. The 2030 pick swap is also an asset, but as I talked about last week in the DeAndre Hunter to Cleveland Cavaliers trade with Atlanta, it was a little surprising that basically Atlanta got 3 second-round picks and then these 2 first-round pick swaps from Cleveland, which may or may not turn into anything. If Atlanta is worse than Cleveland in both of those seasons, then those swaps don't mean anything. So sometimes when you see headlines and when you're reading what trades in the NBA or the WNBA are, you got to ask yourself, who wins the press conference? You got to ask yourself, does this make the team look good? Oh, wow, they got 2 first-round pick swaps and 3 seconds. That's like having 5, it's like, wow, they got 5 draft picks for DeAndre Hunter. It's like, well, what if I told you it would only be like 2 actual draft picks in the second round? One of those second-round picks maybe is at the very end and means nothing, and those first-round pick swaps maybe won't even convert. What if I told you that? What if I told you that the Cavs just added the 6th man of the year, DeAndre Hunter, for like nothing? In this case, the Lakers nixed this trade. I think that there is a decent chance in 2030, even with Luka Doncic, maybe by then Charlotte has rebuilt and is contending or playing better in the East. Maybe the Lakers go through a rough patch or sort of have their rise and fall. They peak maybe in that 28, 29 range, 27, 28, 29 range. And then maybe by 2030, that pick swap has some value. Really, it's about that unprotected 2031 pick. And if you ask me, and I know nothing on this matter, but if you ask me, I think after that trade was made public, I think that the Lakers found out that they could get someone even better for that 2031 pick. And yeah, they had been dangling that out there for a long time, but because it's so far out in the future and it's unprotected, they were probably doing their due diligence for months and months on what exactly the trade market looks like for that pick. And something tells me that they were going to settle for Mark Williams, but then they found out, actually, hey, Lakers, not for nothing, but we were bluffing. We would trade you this guy in the offseason for that pick if it is really available. If it's available unprotected, if the Utah Jazz and the Lakers were negotiating a trade and the Lakers said, well, we'll trade you the 2031 first-round pick for Walker Kessler, but it's got to be top 4 protected. Danny Ainge is probably like, F you, I'm hanging up. But maybe the Lakers do the Mark Williams trade, then maybe the Jazz circle back and say, actually, you know what? We would do it. We would do it unprotected, or we would do it. Can we make it top 2 protected, not top 4? So hypotheticals aside, I wanted to read a quote from Mark Williams' agent to really drive home that this was not without its controversy. The LA Lakers maybe have started something, or in some ways, maybe it's the continuation of some drama that the public wouldn't know about. But to quote Jeff Schwartz of Excel Sports Management, this is Mark Williams' agent, quote, "The overwhelming sentiment after conferring with multiple nationally recognized doctors, is that the Los Angeles Lakers should not have failed Mark Williams on his physical. Mark was ready and able to play for them and should have been given that opportunity, end quote. The Lakers declined to comment to ESPN in response to Schwartz's statement. And I do think that this is exactly the kind of thing that the NBA Players Association, representing all players, should be paying close attention to. The timing of this trade right as the deadline was approaching, which meant that if this trade was to fall through, then there was no recourse option, right? Charlotte has to invite Mark Williams back into their locker room, as awkward as that is. Mark, sorry about that. You're still our guy. You're still our starting center. No hard feelings, ? And the Lakers had to do the same thing with Dalton Knecht. Now, Dalton Knecht's a rookie. So it's like, hey, rookie, sorry about that. You want to play 17 minutes tonight? But this is something to watch. As much of a stink as the league makes about tanking and teams, doing screwy things to players and players' minutes and players' injury status, etc., to get the results that they want for the draft and the lottery, players, agents, and the players' union is not going to mess around with teams pulling the plug on trades. Basically, Mark Williams' reputation just took a huge hit. What's the trade market for Mark Williams right now when the Lakers, who don't have a center better than Jackson Hayes, pulled the plug on this deal, right? They could have had Mark Williams. Now they don't. So if you're Schwartz, you're furious because this makes his client look bad. Now, I don't want to get too into the weeds with Charlotte's stats from this past season. I kind of want to just talk more about the feel of this team and what I think about when I watch this team. To me, and I like Brandon Miller as a prospect. I think Brandon Miller is exactly the kind of wing that you would hope to draft in the top 5 and develop. His injuries aside, I really do think he's going to project to be a good player. I think the Hornets' instinct to trade Mark Williams for a package like that from the Lakers was good. And I think that they should look to do something like that again this summer. I don't think Charlotte is close enough to winning anything serious to not look to trade Mark Williams. Because by the time they're good enough to win something serious, I don't think Mark Williams will be near his athletic peak. And to be honest with you, I don't really know that he projects to be a top 10 or top 15 center in the NBA. I don't consider him to be a very strong defensive prospect. And if you listen to my episode on the Washington Mystics and the Golden State Valkyries of the WNBA recently, and I talked about team building and sort of my preferences for positional development. I mean, the center position, if you're not a defensive stud, that is such a drawback. Like, you got to overcome that with gusto as an offensive player, or else, to me, that's just sort of a subpar level of performance from a center. And that's, I think, what we're up against with Mark Williams. As great as his tools are, he's very large, has big hands, is a lob threat for sure. And playing with LaMelo Ball, I think offensively provides a lot of cool opportunities in the high screen and roll. Again, a lob threat. But I just don't see this Charlotte team with LaMelo Ball at point guard and Mark Williams at center ever defending at a level that would get them a decent playoff seed, let alone earn them an Eastern Conference Finals run. So we'll see. I think at a high level, if Charlotte wins the lottery and they have the opportunity to draft Cooper Flagg at power forward, then you probably just bring everybody back. You see what it looks like. And then when you get in season, you can assess the trade market for guys like Mark, maybe even someone like LaMelo Ball. If you fall in the lottery and end up with something more like the 4th pick or the 5th pick, then I wonder if trading some of these assets, some of these younger players, maybe even trading out of that pick, I wonder if you have to get a little bit more creative. Like, in some ways this offseason, you could just play it safe if you're Charlotte. But alternatively, I do think that if a big swing presents itself, I mean, if you're Charlotte, what do you have to lose? what do you have to lose? You're going to be picking in the top 5 of the NBA draft for at least another couple of years at this rate. I mean, I just don't see them getting into the 38, 39, 40 win range even next season, and that would be a play-in team at best. So consider me dubious. I'm going to wrap up the Charlotte section by just rattling off a few things. The Grant Williams contract, unfortunately, looks to be in a bad place following a torn ACL, only age 26 season. He's on the books for the next 2 years at 8.8% of the cap and 8.4% of the cap going into the 2027 offseason. So, get well soon, Grant Williams. I don't know exactly what his future is in the NBA. If you're Charlotte, it's not the end of the world to have some bad salary, and they actually went out and acquired guys like Yusuf Nurkic, Josh Okogie, who has a non-guarantee that they're going to cut this summer. We'll see what the future of Josh Green is on this team. He's going to have a $13.7 million salary next year. Miles Bridges has another couple years on the books. Charlotte is a team that's a little too expensive for being this bad, in my opinion. And then I think that gets you to the question about Trey Mann's RFA. Now, Mann just didn't play that much this year. When he did, he looked pretty athletic, pretty exciting. Spark plug off the bench kind of potential. We just didn't see a lot of him. He's age 24, shooting guard, not great size, but again, really good knack for scoring. So, if they could come up with a reasonable salary over a 2 or 3 year contract, I think that might be a good middle ground. I would be very surprised if they can come to a long-term contract that makes sense where the player feels like they got a number that they can live with over 4 years. I just don't think we've seen enough of him, but he is promising. He is promising. And lastly, I just want to leave the audience with this. Charlotte needs to get better as a shooting team. Not every team can build around Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, right? And I think LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller would have to admit that so far in their careers, they've left some room to be desired in terms of efficiency. But, I mean, this Hornets team this past year was one of the worst shooting teams in league history. I mean, they had 9 players in their rotation or at least playing 20 games this year, shooting under 54% true shooting percentage. And that's a stat that bakes in 2-point shooting and 3-point shooting, and it gives some weight to 3-point shooting just because it's a higher value shot. I mean, league average is in the high 50s. If you're shooting in the mid 60s true shooting percentage, that's elite. Having 9 players in your rotation shooting under 54% true shooting percentage is really bad. And some of those numbers get well into the 40s. They need to improve the shooting on this team. They need to ask themselves, is LaMelo Ball someone that we really want on the team in a franchise player role in the years to come? He is signed through the 2029 season. He's set to make $46.4 million in the 28-29 season. Is that the future that we want? Or is it time to evaluate his trade market and trade value and see if we can get a really good package? More on that to come because I have an idea. But stay with us. Next, we're going to talk about the Chicago Bulls. Welcome back. Let's talk about the Chicago Bulls. As of March 24th, 31 and 40, 9th in the NBA's Eastern Conference. They are likely to make the play-in round despite only having an expected wins per 82 games at 35.5. So, I mean, projected to be about a 36-win team, and yet they're still going to figure into the postseason coming out of the Eastern Conference. That's how it goes in the East. Bulls are 19th in both offensive rating and defensive rating. They have a 113.8 offensive rating and a 116 defensive rating. So just very below average team across the board. Of course, they made some trades this season, so they've gotten gradually worse as the year has gone on. Negative 2.2 net rating is 21st in the NBA over that period. And we don't have a ton to talk about with the Bulls in terms of previewing this offseason because I have a feeling that we kind of know what this team is going to be. 11 contracts under team control for next year. They have 2 cap holds Trey Jones, who they acquired in season, who I kind of like. And if they didn't have so many point guards on this roster already, then I would say no-brainer to bring him back as a free agent. I don't know that they would be able to afford him. They also have the restricted free agency of Josh Giddey, which we definitely need to talk about. And they have a player option on the books, Javon Carter. Point guard Javon Carter could opt into a $6.8 million deal, which I think he will do. And so this has the Bulls, they're about $11 to $12 million above the salary cap, so not going to be a cap space team. They're only about $21 million below the tax, so they do need to be mindful of how much money they give Josh Giddey in restricted free agency and how they move around some of the other salary on the books, probably via trade, probably trading out salary in order to make sure that they stay out of the tax, as they don't project to be a contending team next year either way, so it just doesn't really make sense for them to go into the tax. They also have their own draft pick. It'll be interesting to see where exactly that falls. But I want to start with some poetry. The band Guster, and this song from one of my favorite films. It's featured in the film Wedding Crashers. I'm awake, you're still sleeping. The sun will rise like yesterday. Everything that we are now is everything we can let go, or it's gone forever, far away. One more time. I hope tomorrow is like today. That is how I feel about the Chicago Bulls team, because every day is like today for the Chicago Bulls. Yesterday is like today. Tomorrow is like today. And today couldn't be more today for a team like the Bulls. What do I mean? Why is this guy singing? Because this team confuses me. It escapes me how they've gotten into this position. Now, for what it's worth, I did not hate the Zach LaVine trade this season. As a reminder, they got their own draft pick back from the San Antonio Spurs, and they took on the bad salary of Zach Collins. They got Trey Jones, who, again, maybe they'll find a way to retain him. And they also took on Kevin Huerter, which, Kevin Huerter at this point, because he's had a couple down seasons in a row, that salary is looked at as bad salary. He's on the books for $17.9. It's really $18 million next season, but it expires after that. And same thing with Zach Collins. His $18 million expires after next season. So basically, the Bulls took on bad salary so they could get their first-round pick back, and they traded Zach LaVine with a lot of money due on his contract. They got that off their books. They're actually in a position where they could have a tremendous amount of cap space in the 26-27 season. So the summer of 2026, Chicago could really be a big-time player in free agency. That has not meant anything in past years that they've had cap space, but it's at least it could be part of a larger plan to really rebuild this roster, reconstruct this roster. Instead, in the short term, I'm just sort of left scratching my head how they have Lonzo Ball, Kevin Huerter, Kobe White, Trey Jones, Ayo Dosunmu, and Javon Carter, all likely to return unless they are otherwise traded. That's 6 guards who are all about the same range of effectiveness. Some are a little better offensively, some are a little better defensively. And we haven't named Josh Giddey, who defensively is incapable of guarding the other team's point guard, but offensively, he is a point guard, or certainly needs to have the ball in his hands. He's been showing improvement as a shooter after the All-Star break, but ideally he has the ball in his hands so that he can't be sagged off, basically so the defense can't check out and leave him in the corner somewhere. And he's a good playmaker, so you want him to be pushing the tempo. You want him to be coming off screens and driving and kicking, right? Ideally. And I actually was in the Discord channel for Dunked On earlier this morning, going back and forth with some other people. And there was one individual who was very, very, very adamant that Josh Giddey at this point has shown enough to warrant a $30 million average annual salary, like as a benchmark. That $25 million a year would be disrespectful. And that what we're probably looking at is a contract, similar or like what Jalen Johnson got and what Jalen Suggs got last year. So something in that $150 million range for 5 years, something like that. And, it's going to be an RFA offer sheet, so it'll probably be a 4-year structure, but, something like 4 years, 120, 4 years, 130, something like that as a baseline. And I mostly agreed with him because the Bulls have put themselves in a position where they traded Alex Caruso straight up for Giddey, knowing that he needed a new contract. They couldn't come to an agreement in October for a rookie scale extension. So you knew that you were going to let the season play out. And chances were he would show signs of the guy that was drafted, high in the first round by OKC and, with opportunity would show flashes of the playmaker and transition up-tempo guard that you want him to be. And at his height, in other words, like this whole thing was kind of telegraphed to me. It's like, we're not going to trade Alex Caruso for a package of draft picks. We're going to trade Alex Caruso straight up for a guy who's going to hit RFA in the summer of 2025. We are then going to not pay him early, and we're going to basically beg of the RFA marketplace, hey, nobody get any crazy ideas. Nobody throw a max at him because he's our guy. And if you recall from last week, I talked about the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, they have more money than they know what to do with. Like, why would the Brooklyn Nets not throw a $30 million average annual value contract at Josh Giddey and see if the Bulls match? I mean, worst case, they don't. And now you have Josh Giddey for a number that maybe you're not crazy about. Or maybe you are. Maybe you're like, great. Now we have a big point guard with passing ability that will excite the fans, and we can always look to trade him a year or two later. Rebuilding teams, you want to acquire real talent and then develop that talent. But I don't know. Like I said, they're going to have to, if they sign Giddey, let's say it's a $30 million average annual value, maybe that first year ends up somewhere in the $25, $26 million range. And then with 8% raises, that's how it gets into the mid-30s by year 4, let's say. Now, you probably need to trade 1 or 2 guys to get out of the tax. And for what it's worth, tax isn't calculated until the end of the financial year. So if they sign Josh Giddey and go into the tax in July of 2025, they would have until June of 2026 to get out of the tax. Although, because of how the marketplace works, really, you got to get out of the tax by the trade deadline because that's the only way you can get off of salary is by trading it. If you cut someone, they still get paid and it still counts against your cap. All of this to say, the idea that the best plan for the Bulls, the path of least resistance, is to give Josh Giddey what the market demands in RFA. You have Vucevic on the books for 1 more year, $21.5 million. They weren't able to find a first-round pick for him in the trade market, so he comes back for 1 more year. Chances are, at age 35, on and expiring, you're not going to get a first-round pick for him next year either. So at best, he gives you some really strong production at center and helps propel you toward what, the 6th seed or the 7th seed? That would be a material improvement in the short term. You still got Patrick Williams making $18 million a year. Contract continues to be a bit of a head scratcher. Kobe White at $12.9 million, and then he hits free agency in the 26-27 year or the summer of 2026? Is Kobe White somebody who they can find a trade partner for? Maybe they can get a low first-round pick, or maybe they can get like 2 future protected picks for something like, if they traded Kobe White and Ayu Dosunmu to a team that really needs guard play, could they get 2 first-round picks? Could they get 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks? Because at a certain point, you got to think about the timeline too. I mean, I really like Matas Buzelis. That's their first-rounder from last year. He's been turning heads as of late. Really, really like his potential at the forward position. And then you'll have Josh Giddey at whatever number you end up signing him at. But some of these guys, I mean, I mentioned Vucevic is in his 30s. Patrick Williams, I guess, is fine because he's so young. And, all joking aside, $18 million a year becomes less and less as the salary cap rises. He's only going to be making 11.6% of the salary cap next year. That actually falls in the 27-28 year. Patrick Williams is only making 9.6% of the salary cap, even though it's an $18 million salary. Mind you, then he has a player option for the 28-29 season. So, I mean, that contract keeps going and going and going. I'll say this. Nothing would help the Bulls more as a franchise than Patrick Williams hitting his stride and jumping up a level, jumping up a tier or 2 at the power forward position. Like, if he could become a real strong power forward on both ends of the floor, a 40% three-point shooter that can also rebound and defend well, like if he could become that guy, now we're talking, because he and Buzelis are going to be a good forward combination. Some of these guards need to hit. Some of these guards need to work out. And then you probably just need to find your way into a significant center at some point. And it's not going to be Vucevic for much longer. That's why I was saying, could you turn Ayu Dosunmu and Kobe White into draft capital so you can get a few more bites at the apple, a few more swings where you can draft some big men that you could develop? But similar to Charlotte, I don't really know where Chicago is going. Yesterday and tomorrow and today, they all kind of seem like the same day for this franchise. And it's been that way for a minute. I mean, really, since the Derrick Rose injury, there hasn't been a year where Chicago is like, this is a disrupting team. This is a team that is going to have a say in who wins the championship or who wins the Eastern Conference. And I don't know when we're going to get there again. But I'll close up the Chicago Bulls section there. Next up on our list is going to be a much better team, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's talk next about the Cleveland Cavaliers, a trendy pick to win the NBA championship this year. The team has done phenomenally. And really everything for this franchise has been up since they made the big swing for Donovan Mitchell. At that time, it was pretty clear to see the plan. We have Darius Garland, we have Evan Mobley, we have Jared Allen. And Jared Allen, by the way, was a throw-in. They found a way to involve themselves in a huge mega trade. I believe that was the James Harden. Yes, the James Harden to Brooklyn trade. It involved Houston and Indiana. And Cleveland inserted themselves and basically were like, hey, we'll include a first-round pick if that draft capital helps move the needle for somebody else. We just want to end up with Jared Allen. That's all. Just little old Jared. Just throw him in there. And then they ended up giving him a 5-year, $100 million contract. So through the 2026 season, he's just a $20 million salary. That's less than 13% of the salary cap for next year. So that's worked out very well as they've been able to build a very strong defensive team with Mobley and Allen as their 2 main bigs. And then, of course, Donovan Mitchell slots in. And you got Garland and Mitchell, 2 of the best offensive generators, playmakers, perimeter shooters in the NBA, especially amongst the elite guard class. And I've talked about it last week and today already, but the DeAndre Hunter trade they made mid-season has very much provided the type of big wing presence that they've been lacking, right? You have these 2 elite guards, you have these 2 elite bigs. Now you can have a guy like Hunter at 6'8" who can credibly guard and also offensively play with a certain size and strength, as well as he's a great 3-point shooter. He is a real small forward. Like, call me a positional essentialist if you need to, but he is an actual small forward. They've been looking for that guy for a long time. Max Strus has been good. Isaac Okoro has been okay. Dean Wade is great, but he's more of a power forward. Ty Jerome is a guard. Sam Merrill is a guard. They just have not had a real small forward on this team. It's hard to get good small forwards, unless you're the Boston Celtics. But I say all that because this 3 to 4 year team build where Cleveland goes from, being lost in the wilderness a bit in the post-LeBron, post-Kyrie era, to now they're going to win the Eastern Conference and have a very credible chance at going all the way. You gotta give credit to this franchise for sticking it out, for being diligent, for building in a smart way, investing in a lot of talent. So I'm proud of these guys. I love watching them play basketball. Kenny Atkinson is a great coach who really has these guys playing fun, physical, smart brand of basketball. Let's get into the fundamentals here. 57-14 as of March 24th. They are on track per Cleaning the Glass for an expected 64 wins. They are first in the NBA in offensive rating, 123.2. And their defensive rating, 8th in the NBA, 112.5. That's a positive 10.7 net rating, second best in the league. And win, lose, or draw this postseason, as we look ahead to what they got on the books for next year. 10 contracts under team control, 0 restricted free agents, 0 player options, and 4 cap holds. Most notably among that group, I would say, is Ty Jerome. We'll see if they can afford him or not. My guess is that he is going to bolt in free agency for, whatever the biggest offer he can get is, especially at age 28. This is his time to cash in on a career season. But yeah, they have Garland, Mitchell, Hunter, Allen, all under contract, Mobley. They also have Strus and Okoro and Dean Wade under team control, plus Craig Porter Jr. So they have a lot of guys already wrapped up, but let's go into the hard part. So they are likely going to be about $56 million over the salary cap. So very much an over the cap team. They're actually over the second apron projected. And so they don't have any draft picks. Really, the question is, how can we build a 14-man roster? You can have 15, in the NBA, it's a 15-man roster, but you have to carry 14. And so for a team like Cleveland, maybe you drop the 15th slot just so that you can save money. But even with that said, now you're well into the second apron. So do you play a full year in the second apron or go into the regular season as a second apron team hoping that you can trade out? That's a roll of the dice, especially for a smaller market team like Cleveland. And I'm not exactly sure who you would trade to get out of the second apron either. Let's say that Cleveland makes the NBA Finals. Win or lose, I don't think that they're trading any of their core pieces. And at this point, especially with Ty Jerome most likely on the way out, I would say Hunter is their 5th most important player, and in his own way is unmovable. Max Strus at $15.9 million, you would love to get off of that money if you can find a trade where you can get back a cheaper shooting option, and or Sam Merrill, find a affordable way to bring him back, and maybe he jumps into those minutes. He's not as good as Max Strus on the defensive end, but he can match his shooting. You still have Isaac Okoro at $11 million. Someone like Jalen Tyson is a 22, 23-year-old guy. Maybe he steps up into a bigger role. I think for both Cleveland and Boston, the common theme is going to be, how can we cut our tax bill without sacrificing the necessary depth that it takes to go all the way in a 4 playoff series environment, a 16-win environment of the postseason. Like, you need 8, 9, 10 guys to compete. And by the way, you can't just snap your fingers and go to the playoffs. Like, you need 9, 10, 11 guys just to get through the regular season and the inevitability of injury. So I don't necessarily have a suggestion here, but I just want to point out for the Cavs, 32.5% of their salary cap next year is tied up in DeAndre Hunter, Max Strus, and Isaac Okoro. Any way that you can move off of Strus and Okoro and keep Hunter without losing any other significant pieces to the team, I think you have to find a way to do that. Because you don't want to be in the second apron. It means that there are restrictions against you trading for any additional salary. Like, every trade that you make, you have to be dropping your salary. You can't use the taxpayer mid-level exception. You can't enter the buyout market for any veterans that are bought out of their contracts. Like, there are things about title contention that they would be restricted from doing, which would almost virtually remove them from the mix. I mean, it's a double-edged sword now, where the exact type of cap maneuvers and exceptions that you need as a title contending team in order to bolster that depth and to have a winning rotation, those options are taken away from you if you're in over the second apron. If you're over the first apron, it's less punitive. It's less punitive because you're not as far into the tax, so your tax bill is materially less, but you can at least go into a trade, and if you acquire $1 more than the other team, the trade is still legal. That is a huge difference. So I actually don't have that much to say about Cleveland, and I want to make sure we get to the other 3 teams and keep this episode under an hour and a half. So I'm going to leave it there. We don't know if the Cavs are going to go all the way. If they have a disappointing postseason, then maybe there are some other things that they would consider. I don't think it's impossible that Jared Allen gets traded. I would be shocked if Garland or Mitchell got traded, and Evan Mobley is untouchable as far as I can tell. Maybe if you could find the right trade partner where they take on, let's say they take on Strus and Jared Allen. And if they really value Jared Allen, maybe they don't need a first-round pick because they don't really have their own picks to trade. You Utah Jazz are the owners of most of the Cavs draft picks in the future. But I mean, 20 plus 16, so $36 million in outgoing salary. You know, that means that the Cavs could do a trade where, you know, maybe they take back $24 million player, a $26 million player, and they would get out of the second apron. And if that player was a power forward or a center that you thought could play well next to Evan Mobley, I think you could justify that. Now, again, if they win the championship, Jared Allen is going to get a contract extension. He's not going to get traded. You know, the Cavs will probably keep their core 4 together forever, and they'll put a banner up, and everybody will remember that this was the best Cavs team post LeBron James. I mean, honestly, their regular season this year was so good that they probably should treat it that way regardless. Like, even if they got ousted in the second or third round of the postseason this year, I think they would still go into 2026 as one of the title favorites. But they got to pay attention to that second apron. That is a big, big, big problem for them. So with that, let's go to the Detroit Pistons. As we continue moving through the Eastern Conference, a lot of the teams in this episode today are franchise of a similar cloth, you know, of a similar background. We're talking a lot about Midwest and Mid-Atlantic cities. You know, we're not talking about LA or New York City. You know, in the case of Chicago, you know, that's a major market. But when we're talking about Cleveland or Charlotte or Detroit, these are franchises where their reputation their ability to put a product on the floor that excites their fans, that honors their ticket holders. These considerations are paramount. And I say that earnestly. I say that genuinely. I think if you're the Pistons, it has been a difficult stretch of time since the last great Pistons team. It's been a prolonged period without a great Pistons team. And Cade Cunningham, I think you could argue he has already been at a level where this comment is relevant, but this was the year on a national level. You finally, once and for all, you move on from Monty Williams. You shed the ghost of that 26-game losing streak from last year. All of the things that have gone wrong in the past. And Cade Cunningham comes out and says, I'm the best player on a playoff team. Y'all got to come with me on this journey. We're doing it starting this year. We're making the playoffs. We are a team that, if you push us, we push back. We might even push first. We're a tough team. You got guys on this team that are playing with a lot of pride, who've taken steps in their development. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited for the Pistons and their fans, because I think Cade Cunningham is the kind of player where if the Pistons had bailed on him or said, you know what, we're not going anywhere, let's just trade him for 4 first-round picks, call it a day. This came up, I'm a big fan of the Rights to Ricky Sanchez podcast. I'm not a Sixers fan, but I've been following them for 11, 12 years now, something like that. And Mike Levin was really, really obsessed with the idea of, do you think the Pistons would trade Cade Cunningham? The Sixers have 4 or 5 first-round picks that they could include in a trade like that. And I remember when he first brought that up, I was like, that's the kind of thing that could ruin a franchise. If you if you draft someone number 1 overall and they're good, but your team is so bad that it's actually more advantageous to trade that player away and start a rebuild over again, and then you watch that player crush it on the team that they are sent to. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you lose fans permanently. People don't come back to your games. And that's the fear in Dallas right now, right after the Luka Doncic trade, is you might have lost thousands and thousands of Mavericks fans for life. You're not just starting over on the court, you're starting over, on your season ticket holder log, and on the spreadsheets in your corporate offices. Like, it's bad. It is ugly. And so with that in mind, let's talk about Detroit, which, it's been a overwhelmingly positive season for them. As of March 24th, 40-32, 6th in the NBA's Eastern Conference per Cleaning the Glass. Their expected wins total per 82 games, 45.6. So they're, on track to be somewhere in the mid-40s, firmly in the playoffs. We'll see if they can maybe sneak into that 4-5 seed matchup in the first round. That would be really spicy. Otherwise, there's been a collision course between the Knicks and the Pistons in the 3-6 matchup for a little while now. Offensive rating 114.8. That's 15th in the NBA. And this is where it gets really exciting. Defensive rating 112.9. That's 9th in the NBA. A top 10 defense for the Detroit Pistons. Positive net rating, positive 1.9. That's 12th in the NBA. So again, they've been a playoff team over the course of the season. Looking good, playing good. As we look toward next season, 10 contracts under team control, no restricted free agents, no player options, and 5 cap holds. We'll see with those veterans, does Tim Hardaway Jr. come back? Dennis Schroeder. Malik Beasley is probably the most interesting name after the dominant three-point shooting performance we've seen from him this year. One of the best shooters in the league, full stop. Someone who's really, really been helpful on the floor with Cade Cunningham, as Cade has gotten a lot more confident in transition and pushing tempo and finding shooters on the floor, leveraging his ability at 6'7" to get all the way into the paint and creating drive and kick chances. One more year of Tobias Harris left at $26.6 million. Isaiah Stewart is still on a $15 million deal for a couple years. They got rookie scale guys like Arsar Thompson, Ron Holland, Jaden Ivey. They're all making between $8 and $10 million next year. Simone Fontecchio is on the books for $8.3 million. We'll see if he sticks around at age 29 as a stretch four. Marcus Sasser, cheap option, who's been pretty good this year. And Jalen Duren, who we're going to talk a lot about as he enters the fourth and final year of his rookie contract. The Pistons are likely losing their first-round pick. They're going to be sending it to Minnesota if they make the playoffs. It's only top 13 protected. So if they make the playoffs, Minnesota's getting that first-round pick. I think if you're Detroit, you can totally live with that. That's a trade-off that you can live with. In terms of the financial fundamentals, just finishing that out, likely cap space is about $20 million. So they actually will have the ability to make a competitive offer for at least one player. We'll see if Malik Beasley is their pick. I don't know that he is $20 million a year good, but more and more, I mean, $20 million is only so much of the salary cap moving forward. I mean, it's interesting to think about, really, if $15 million is about 10% of the salary cap, we're talking about like 13% is a $20 million deal. So maybe Beasley will go for that. I mean, Hardaway Jr. is coming off a $16.2 million salary, and Hardaway Jr. probably never had a year as good as Beasley just had, but he was a veteran shooter, someone that doesn't need to start, but maybe you could start if they're playing well. So adjusted for inflation, yeah, maybe Beasley is about $20 million, and maybe the Pistons should prioritize bringing him back. Per Cleaning the Glass, the trio of Cade Cunningham, Malik Beasley, and Jalen Duren in 1,200 possessions this year is plus 5.4. It's a strong trio. They're in the 86th percentile in offensive rating, scoring over 120 points per 100 possessions when those three are out there. They're actually, when that trio's on the floor, they're competitive on the defensive glass, an average defensive rating. So, I mean, that's a winning trio. If you told me that their starting lineup next year was Cade Cunningham, Malik Beasley, Jalen Duren at the 5, and then you just have to figure out who your best 3-4 combination is. You've used first-round picks on forwards in recent seasons, Arsar Thompson, Ron Holland. Like, this team makes a lot of sense. They are very well built. Tobias Harris, they spent cap space on him last year on a 2-year deal. So he could be a starting forward, again for you in year 2, or because he's going into an expiring, maybe you find a trade for Tobias Harris and you promote those rookies, you let them play. Jaden Ivey is coming off of an injury, and so if he can get back on the floor for you next year, you turn the bench unit over to him and make him a backup point guard for Cade. I think that makes sense, at least for a stopgap year. Maybe in the long term, Jaden Ivey's too good to be a bench player, but Malik Beasley is the kind of guy where if you're having success with him on the floor, you're trying to reestablish yourself as a playoff team. I think the Pistons are well within their right to prioritize bringing him back on a 2 or 3 year deal. Beasley is 28, so age 29 next year. I think that is a decent use of their cap space. Let's talk about Jalen Duren. He'll be eligible for a rookie scale extension in October or through October, through the start of the season. We're talking about one of the more physically gifted centers, young centers in the NBA. Came into the NBA highly touted, 6'11", 250 pounds, very long, a 7'5" wingspan. And in year 3, I think there are signs that he's starting to put it together in terms of being a presence on both ends of the floor. He's a strong lob threat, big hands, some of the offensive rebounds well. The Pistons have a plus 1.7 net rating with him on the floor over 3,700 possessions per Cleaning the Glass. They are better on the offensive end than the defensive end, however, as it's a 118.5 offensive rating Rather, when Cade and Duren are on the floor together, they get up to a 118.5 offensive rating. And remember, I said 120.1 offensive rating when you add Beasley. So you can see how if Duren's your center, a play finisher, a dunker, someone who can roll hard to the rim, combine him with Cade Cunningham as a playmaker, as a table setter, and then you add in an elite marksman shooter, you see how that trio, it makes sense offensively. You can really build a competent offensive lineup around those guys. I think defensively, there is still question marks for me. But I mean, you can't deny some of these stats and the fact that they have been winning big games and they're in the playoff mix firmly. I mean, again, just another stat. When Cade and Duren are on the floor together, the Pistons are scoring. The Pistons have an field goal percentage, an effective field goal percentage of 89th percentile. They're shooting and shooting well. So I wanted to put together a few comparisons salary-wise, kind of one on the low end, one on the high end, in terms of what Duren's rookie scale contract extension might look like. But I'll first say, the Pistons gave Isaiah Stewart, Beef Stew, a 4-year, $60 million contract. And that was for him to come in and play a role. And I think what we've seen is that Isaiah Stewart is very important to the culture of the team. He can play the 4 or the 5, but he's probably better suited as a backup 5. And I think $15 million a year is more or less what a good backup center should be paid. Ideally, maybe you are paying a little bit less to your backup and a little bit more to your starter. But again, Beef Stew brings a important cultural piece to the team, and they want him on the books long term. That contract for Stewart was very similar to what Onyeka Okongwu got for the Hawks. And we talked about this last week. The Hawks have been paying Clint Capella every year that Onyeka has been on the team. But obviously, if you're Onyeka Okongwu's agent and it's time to negotiate a contract, you're like, hey, even if you can't start my client, you got to pay him. He is someone who should already be starting games, should already be developing. If he was on a worse team or on a team with a different set of personnel, he would have already gotten the reps. He would already be putting up numbers, and we wouldn't even be talking about $15 million a year. We'd be talking about $20 million a year, 25. So those baseline, that $15 to $20 million range, that's a baseline. If you're Jalen Duren, you're insulted by that. You're insulted by those numbers. I mean, let me just give you some tried and true counting stats. We're talking about someone who, for their career, is a 10.2 rebounds per game guy, 11.6 last year, and this year in fewer minutes, 10.2. At his size, I think that he is going to continue to get better and better in terms of controlling the paint, if not as a rim protector in a traditional sense, because he isn't the best. He doesn't have the best timing or the best footwork in terms of being a shot blocking guy. But per 36 minutes, if he was playing true starters minutes, we're seeing his career averages are more like 13 to 14 rebounds a game. So I think that Jalen Duren is someone that has to get paid relative to his potential and the high likelihood that he is going to be a 13 or 14 points, 10, 11, 12 rebounds per game. And because of his size, he's not a pushover down low. Hopefully in the most competitive environments, he holds his own against the opposing team starting center. He's only 21 years old now. He's going to get better and better. I think that the comp that is going to have the most sway from the player agent side dictating to the team, this is what we expect, this is what we're looking for, is Alperen Şengün. Because both of these guys entered the NBA. They weren't top 5 draft picks. Alperen Şengün was the 16th pick in the 2021 draft. Jalen Duren, the 13th pick in the 2022 draft. both guys have physical tools. Maybe you have some questions. Maybe there is, a fixed ceiling on exactly where they could end up. Alperen Sengun is never going to be a defensive player of the year, even if he unlocks his full potential offensively. I think Jalen Duren, it's actually kind of a similar analysis where I think we can rule out Jalen Duren being a first-team All-NBA center. But if he's one of the best 5 rebounders in the NBA and somebody that is shooting 65% from the field because it's all dunks and layups and he and Cade are developing a great chemistry and he's really making a difference offensively at the 5 spot, then I think that could all add up to justifying a significant salary. And so, as a reminder, Alperen Sengun, he didn't sign a max contract. It was sub-max. It was a 5-year, $185 million deal, which means that next season, when that contract kicks in, his salary is $33.9 million. That goes up to 35.6, 37.4, 39. And then there's a player option, and this is interesting, for $39 million again. So that year 5 salary, it's a player option, but it doesn't rise. And I think that that's setting the table for him to opt out of that 5th year. So really, Houston would just be paying Sengun 4 years and about $145 million, and then they could renegotiate at that time. I think that that's something of a comp, something of a comparison for the Pistons and Duren. I would be a little surprised if the number got all the way up to 185, because Sengun has shown much more as a playmaker, as someone who can score for himself and create scoring opportunities for himself. Duren is a more dependent offensive player and is going to really hug Cade Cunningham in terms of relying on Cade for getting set up and getting opportunities on the offensive end. But if I'm the player agent, I start the negotiation at 5 years, $185 million. And then you spend your time haggling over, can we talk about player options? Can we talk about bonuses? Maybe the Pistons are like, hey, we can't do more than $150 million guaranteed. All right, well, let's talk about maxing out unlikely bonuses so that my client can play himself into more money. Let's put a player option on year 5 so that my client can get back out on the market and we can renegotiate something better. So that's my comparison. Maybe that's going to scare Pistons fans, the idea that they're going to fork over, something like $175, $180 million for Jalen Duren. We'll see. If you think I'm totally off base there, let me know. Things are on the up and up for Detroit. Really excited to see where they go. And next up, we're going to talk about another team that I really like and that I think has a lot of positivity, has a lot of positive developments happening for their franchise and a lot of good concerns and good opportunities for them in the years to come. That's the Indiana Pacers. Welcome back. Talking Indiana Pacers, a team that's 41-29 as of March 24th. 4th in the NBA's Eastern Conference. Bit of a race, a bit of a jostling happening between the 4, 5, 6 seeds. You got the Indiana Pacers, the Milwaukee Bucks, and Detroit Pistons. So we'll see where these teams end up and who their first-round playoff opponent will be. Tell you what, not sure anybody wants to play the Indiana Pacers. They've been looking mighty good down the stretch, especially Tyrese Halliburton. Looks like he's rounding back into form. We haven't really seen him playing at this level in something like 2 calendar years. So really excited to talk about this Pacers team because I think their future is bright. Halliburton is one of the smartest, most skilled players in the NBA, is someone that figures to be 15 to 20 points, 10 to 15 assists, 5 to 10 rebounds, elite 3-point shooting, throw in some steals, and in general, just the demeanor and presence that you want from a franchise superstar point guard. He's just the real deal. He's got everything you're looking for. And this Indiana team building around him figures to be a playoff fixture year in, year out. Their expected wins for this season is 44.6 per cleaning the glass. So, ending up somewhere in the mid to high 40s, particularly if they can add some wins late in the season and push for that 4 seed. That's a pretty good year for them. Offensive rating, 116.1, so inside the top 10. Would love to see that tick upward in the years to come, especially a team built around Halliburton. You probably want to max out as like a top 5 offensive team, and then you just hope the defense can stay close enough to middle of the pack so that you're going to compete. Obviously, if you could build a perfect team around Halliburton, you would have all defensive stalwarts that can also shoot 40% from 3, but it's hard to build a perfect team. So again, 10th in offensive rating, they're 15th in defensive rating with a 114.6. That's a positive 1.4 net rating, which is 13th in the NBA. They've been playing better as of late, so we'll see, if they can be an even more effective team come playoff time. Looking at their financial fundamentals, 10 contracts under team control for next year. They have 3 cap holds, and they also have a restricted free agency. That's Isaiah Jackson. Now, Isaiah Jackson, I'll just touch on briefly. He really was showing signs early in the season, but unfortunately went down with a season-ending injury back in November. And I'm a big fan. I think that he is, at minimum, a rotation big in today's NBA, someone that can credibly, roll to the basket and play finish on the offensive end, and then defensively can rebound and guard his position. And again, I don't know that you want him to be a starting center for you, but especially on a team like this, where you're playing fast, I think it's more about having bigs who are dynamic enough and athletic enough to attack the glass, be relentless on defense, and also play up-tempo and play in transition and play finish. Halliburton can find you rolling to the basket, pocket passes, that sort of thing. So I really like Isaiah Jackson. I'm hoping that he makes a full recovery for his age 24 season. What that means, though, for next season is that I think that it's unlikely that he is going to get a long-term contract to his liking. The timing of this injury is pretty bad. His cap hold is going to be $13.3 million. We'll see. I think that a 1-year qualifying offer, which buys both teams another season of data so that they can make a larger assessment on if they want to stay in business together and negotiate a multi-year agreement. I think something like that is in the cards. Let me finish the financial fundamentals here. Team is likely going to be above the salary cap, about $15 or $16 million above the salary cap, about $12 million below the tax if they fill out their roster, 14-man roster. And they do have a first-round pick, which is their own. Indiana famously never, ever trades their first-round pick. And their first-round pick is almost always in the low 10s to high 10s or into the 20s if they have a very good team. But, Indiana famously never bottoms out. They always try to win as many games as possible. And so we'll see. I mean, they're going to probably be able to add a player in the 18, 19, 20 range this year. Hopefully that is someone that can contribute for them. I think the number one question for Indiana is we're going to finally get some resolution on what has been a years-long question of, do the Indiana Pacers consider Miles Turner to be a true member of their core and the long-term starting center for this team? Maybe if Isaiah Jackson had never gotten hurt, maybe this center rotation would actually have started to resemble the Atlanta Hawks a little bit, where Clint Capella started more or less the first 41 games of the season. And then in the second half, Atlanta said, you know what, Clint, we appreciated your 5.5 years as the starting center, but we think Onyeka has surpassed you, and we're ready to give him a shot at the job and give him a chance to be the starting center. And then Onyeka never looked back, and he has surpassed Clint Capella's production and then some. And so that means that we're going to see Clint Capella hit free agency. Atlanta's going to certainly move forward with Onyeka Okongwu as the starting center. Alternatively, Indiana is a team in a stranger situation. I mean, in some ways, it's a good problem to have, but they have a lot of young power forward and center type players. And they really, I think, need to decide some things this offseason in terms of how many resources do they want to allocate to the 4 and 5 positions on a team where you have Halliburton at the 1. You gave Andrew Nembhard a long-term deal. He is probably best as a point guard, but maybe you think that Halliburton and Nembhard can play often enough next to each other. Plus, Nembhard is a good option for any games that Halliburton is going to miss at point guard to take over that spot. But then, oh, by the way, you also have TJ McConnell, one of the better point guards, one of the better backup point guards in the NBA. He's making $10.2 million next year and then $11 million after that. So, I'm kind of jumping all over the place because Indiana has some very fascinating contracts. I mean, just to rattle some of these numbers off, Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton are both set to make $45.6 million next year. And then the next most expensive contract on the books is Nembhard jumps up to 18.1. That's on a new extension. Obi Toppin has a $14 million salary for next year, followed by a $15 million salary at power forward. Aaron Naismith is, he's a small forward and a power forward. For the sake of this conversation, let's throw him in that power forward discussion. He's at an $11 million flat salary this year and next year. Then you got Jarris Walker, who has not played all that much for Indiana since being drafted in the top 10. I believe that was the 23 NBA draft. So he's still on a rookie scale deal. Next year is his third year. And then 26-27 would be his year 4. So he has another year to get on the court, put up some stats, and give Indiana some data points to work with before deciding if they should give him a rookie scale extension. At this rate, I would say it's not going to work out because there just hasn't been enough of a sample. And again, he's a power forward. Then you got Isaiah Jackson. Let's boil it down. Miles Turner is hitting free agency as a center. You got Pascal Siakam as a power forward who is a starter, second best player on the team. Aaron Naismith can play the 3, but also can play some 4. You got Benedict Mathurin. I didn't name him. He has a $9.2 million salary next year. He's a wing. Ben Shepherd is a wing who they like. He's on a great contract. He should be playing. So they have some interesting rotational questions, to say the least. I would say to stay on the Miles Turner question for just a second. He's going to be going into his age 29 season. We're talking about one of the rare big men who can hit threes and protect the rim and block shots at a high level. And that combination of skill set is very valuable. His cap hold is $29.9 million. I actually wouldn't be shocked if he gets that. That's only 19% of the salary cap. I think that even though there's a dearth of teams with cap space, I definitely think that there are teams that would engage Miles Turner and say, hey, maybe we could work out a sign and trade with Indiana. Maybe they sign you to a 4 or 5 year deal and sign and trade to us. We'll give them some, younger players and some draft picks and they can kind of build out their rotation. But then the question is, who's your new center? It's not going to be Isaiah Jackson next year, at least not on day one. And you need someone that can play next to Siakam and be successful with Halliburton. And I think Turner has shown enough. I think the Halliburton, Siakam, Turner trio has actually been quite good, particularly with Halliburton having less than stellar health over the last 2 years. I actually think that trio has shown enough where if you can come up with, maybe it's something like the Jared Allen contract. Jared Allen got 5 years, $100 million, a $20 million AAV. Turner's coming off of a $20 million salary. Maybe you say, hey, we'll start you at 20. And, maybe they offer him raises and that's what, seals the deal, right? So maybe it's, hey, we'll give you a rising salary over those 5 years and, that will give you a little extra, for being a loyal pacer all these years, or maybe, you come in high with a certain number and you descend the salary so that you can get some cost relief in the years to come. That would kind of offset the rising costs with Halliburton and Siakam. So I think there's a lot of creative ways you can do it. I guess what I'm saying is I would not be shocked if the Turner deal is a 4 or 5 year deal, 9 figures, because this is Turner's best chance of getting paid. Alternatively, Obi Toppin making 9% of the salary cap next year. Jarvis Walker, because he was a relatively high draft pick, he's making $6.6 million. That's 4% of the cap. Like they have some salaries on the books here where I'm not exactly sure it's the best use of their salary cap. I think they have to decide, like, who are the 7 or 8 guys that we can't live without, that we need to have on the roster next year, and then how can we lean out some of these cap obligations. At point guard, I guess I've been chopping at the bit to bring this up because I started with Miles Turner, and then I kept coming back to Nembhard and McConnell. Well, to me, it's a little weird that you're a Tyrese Halliburton team, one of the best point guards in the NBA, and yet 18.3% of their salary cap is invested in backup point guards, Andrew Nembhard and TJ McConnell. And these last couple of years, that strategy has paid off because Halliburton has been facing some injury struggles. In the long run, though, if you're going to be paying Halliburton north of $50 million a year, I think you would rather use that 18% of the salary cap on wings, forwards, and bigs that can help supplement and ultimately round out this team. So I think they have some questions they have to answer, but in some ways they're good problems to have. I could see them getting involved in the trade market as a seller and as a buyer. And as long as they go into next season with Halliburton, Siakam, if it's not Miles Turner, they would of course need to replace him with a credible center. But if you find the right sign and trade partner, I wouldn't be mad at them moving on from Miles Turner. They would just need to address that. Is Jarvis Walker ready to jump into the rotation in a meaningful way? Now, he's not going to supplant Pascal Siakam at the 4 spot. But if you knew that Siakam and Jarvis Walker were going to be spending some time next to each other, Siakam can give you some looks at the 5. Maybe you have some small ball lineups where it's Siakam, Walker, Naismith. That's interesting to me. But, we're going to see what they prioritize and ultimately what direction they go in. Maybe it'll depend on how successful they are this postseason. I do want to mention briefly Bennedict Mathurin. He is going to be eligible for a rookie scale extension. I think that the comparison here is Jonathan Kuminga last year for the Golden State Warriors, where both of these gentlemen are very talented, and the things that they do best are rare. It's rare to have a power forward like Kuminga who can gracefully spin into a dunk on a post-entry play and make the opposing big man look like a slow buffoon, right? Kuminga is a powerful, athletic forward that can score, that can generate scoring opportunities at a high level. Now, he doesn't do a ton of other things well, and certainly Golden State has had their difficulties integrating him into their system. And so they did not come to an agreement in October of 2024, and we'll see what RFA looks like for Golden State this time around. I think Kuminga is a likely candidate to get a big, big offer sheet from a Brooklyn Nets type team. So we'll see. I think similarly, Bennedict Mathurin, from day one in the NBA, this guy has shown that he can draw fouls and create shot attempts that put him in a rare company as a wing. He has the size and the height to attack the basket, to generate step back shooting opportunities. Like, this is a guy with a lot of potential. Now, he's raw. He's not the best shooter yet. And on this team and with this Halliburton system under Rick Carlisle, I just don't see it. I don't think it's going to happen in Indiana. I think Mathurin needs a change of scenery. I've also long been an advocate of Kuminga having a change of scenery. And so my prediction would be Indiana and Mathurin are not able to come to an agreement. I don't think it makes a ton of sense. For example, just to throw a number out there, I don't think it makes sense for, a 4-year, $60 million deal where Mathurin, locks in life-changing money, yes, but $15 million could end up looking very, very slight if Mathurin has a great fourth year and goes into RFA, basically being like, hey, the bidding starts at $25 million a year. I'm a starting caliber wing. I'm a 20 points per game scorer. Like, I want to see a 4-year, $100 million offer sheet. I want to see a 4-year, $125 million offer sheet. Like, you don't want to be in a position where you take half the money that you could have gotten 9 months later. And I don't think Indiana's going to pay him like that up front. So we'll see. I think that's also a big question for them. But definitely Miles Turner is the big question. I like Miles Turner a lot. I think my prediction would be that Indiana keeps him. But for now, let's keep things rolling. We're going to finish up this podcast with the Miami Heat. And last but not least, the Miami Heat, coached by Eric Spoelstra. This is one of the more storied and celebrated franchises in the NBA during the 21st century. They made the NBA Finals as recently as 2023. They are not going to make the NBA Finals in 2025. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure when they figure to be in the NBA Finals mix again. They do project to have cap space in 2026. And as I'll get to a little later on, I think that whether that is a sign that they are going to make a major play in free agency in 2026 or make a major trade so that they have the salary cap space to just take on a big contract for future years. I think anybody that follows professional basketball knows that the Miami Heat are very clever and very determined to always regenerate and reload contending teams, and they know how to get talent in the door. Alternatively, the Jimmy Butler fiasco from this season was a tough look. It was a tough look to watch this Miami Heat team where, with Jimmy as their best player, they made 2 NBA Finals over the last 5 seasons. Jimmy had, was a great Miami Heat player until he wasn't. But if you were going to try to look at things from an objective point of view, Jimmy Butler was looking out for himself and trying to get somewhere where they would give him an extension and where he could compete for championships. And the truth was, Miami was not interested in giving him an extension ahead of time. Meanwhile, Golden State was able to extend to him 2-year, $121 million extension. And he's going to be competing for championships and big-time playoff series in the Western Conference, playing alongside Steph Curry and Draymond Green and under head coach Steve Kerr. Like, Jimmy Butler absolutely won. He absolutely won that saga. And if you're Miami, the truth is, Jimmy left for the money, but he also left because there isn't that much winning left to do in Miami. And they weren't really that close to winning a title either. In 2023, they got their butts kicked by the Denver Nuggets, and they really weren't much of a threat to the Lakers in the 2020 bubble either. So winning the East and winning the NBA title, not the same thing. And if you already won the East 2 times, and really the last thing that you need as an accomplishment, if you're Jimmy Butler, is an NBA title, it made sense for him to force his way out of Miami, because playing with Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Kevin Love, Jaime Jaquez, Hayward Highsmith, like, this rotation was not going to get that job done. Just wasn't. Even if Jimmy played as hard as he could during the regular season to help them get a better seed to set up a more plausible pathway in the postseason, it just wasn't going to happen. And I think we give the Heat the benefit of the doubt year after year because of their track record and their legacy, and because their coaching staff is one of the best coaching staffs in the NBA. But I think Jimmy saw the writing on the wall, and when they weren't willing to give him a 9-figure extension, at the, he's getting toward the end of his career. He wants to lock in as much guaranteed money as he can before he hangs it up. I can see why it went really, really bad, why it went really, really ugly. And so we'll see. We'll see how Miami rebounds this offseason. As of March 24th, they had a record of 30-41, 10th in the NBA's Eastern Conference and falling. They're not nearly as competitive without Jimmy on the roster. Their expected wins per 82 games, 36.6. That could be much lower than that, actually. 23rd in offensive rating, 112.2. And 12th in defensive rating, 114.0. They were in a lot of close games this year and, sort of infamously have been one of the worst fourth quarter teams in recent memory. And so getting into so many close games and not coming through or having fourth quarter leads and then falling apart week after week after week, I think that just built up a toxicity in their locker room that just wasn't going to be relieved until the Jimmy Butler situation resolved itself. And so at least they can finish the year, see what they got with some of these young guys. For the 25-26 offseason, they have 11 contracts under team control. They have one cap hold. They have one player owed a player option in Duncan Robinson, and he is almost certainly going to pick that up for $19.9 million. It's actually, for what it's worth, it's its early termination option. So that means that there's a certain day that he has to terminate the agreement by. Otherwise, the default is that he will be back for the agreed upon salary. So it's a little bit of a different language than a player option, but by all accounts, it's up to Duncan Robinson whether or not he wants to be on that salary. Now, interestingly, as we'll get to momentarily, only $9.9 million of that money is guaranteed. It was a very interesting term in their negotiation. 5-year, $90 million deal. And then in this 5th year, there's the ETO on Duncan's side, but then on the Miami side, only $9.9 million guaranteed. It fully guarantees 2 days after the 2025 moratorium ends, which is estimated to be July 8th. And so on the Miami side, yes, they have to give Duncan $9.9 million. But if they find a pathway that they like, whether that's trading Duncan or if they decide, we actually would just rather waive him, get him off the team and not have to pay the remaining salary, right? That's a $10 million decision. $10 million decision. Very interesting that they could walk away from that $10 million. And so I say all that because at a high level, they're just too expensive. They're just way too expensive. They are about $30 million over the salary cap. They're only $9 million away from the first apron and $21 million from the second apron. For one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, they are way, way, way too expensive. And part of that is they have Bam Adebayo on a huge deal. It'll be $37 million next year, and that jumps up to $51 million the following year, by the way. But, even at 37, that's a big contract. $31 million for Tyler Hero. They now have Andrew Wiggins. He's set to make $28.2 million next year, and he has a $30 million player option the following year. They owe Terry Rozier $24 million. As I mentioned, they owe Duncan Robinson $9.9 million. But the salary is if it's fully guaranteed, jumps up to $20 million. They also have Kyle Anderson for $9.2 million. Hayward Highsmith's $5.6 million. Khalil Ware's on a rookie deal. It's as good, but for $4.4 million. Kevin Love's a $4 million player. Jaime Jaquez is nearly $4 million. Nikola Jovic is $4.5 million. You start adding up these salaries, and they don't have nearly as many value deals as you would like. The only value deals they really have are the rookie scale guys. Everybody else has gotten paid. And lastly, just to go back, I don't think I mentioned this, they do have Davion Mitchell's match rights in restricted free agency. But as we're talking about the expense of this team, I don't think they could afford Davion Mitchell in RFA. I think they would have to clear out a lot of salary in order to bring him back. Otherwise, I think he'll be gone. So How about this? 68% of their salary cap for next year, as things presently stand, are represented by 4 players, all guards. Well, Wiggins is like a guard forward, but Hero, Wiggins, Robinson, Rozier. 68% of the cap for those 4 guys. You're going nowhere. You're going nowhere with the majority of your cap on those guys. Andrew Wiggins is a pretty decent two-way player, but Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson are closer to 6th men. Duncan Robinson may be closer to a 7th or 8th man. And yet they're getting paid like 2 guys that should be on the floor in crunch time for you. Terry Rozier makes even more money than Duncan Robinson. And he's had an abysmal season for a number of reasons. We won't get into all of them right here, right now. But that's just too much money for a guard wing rotation that is subpar, not even good. Like just, I would say like very mediocre. And I actually like Andrew Wiggins in a vacuum. And I don't mind Miami taking a look at Andrew Wiggins long-term, taking him into the season. But I think you got to make some tough calls between Hero, Robinson, and Rozier. And you're not going to be able to find a trade for Terry Rozier. That's the problem. I think Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson, there is some trade value that we can talk about with them. But, let me add this in. If you add Bam, so Bam, Hero, Wiggins, Robinson, Rozier, that's 92% of the salary cap for those 5 guys. If that was your starting lineup, that's like the worst starting lineup in the NBA. So, and then you add in another 8.7% of the salary cap for Slow-Mo and Kevin Love. So great. We did it. Those 7 names, Hero, Wiggins, Robinson, Rozier, Bam Adebayo, Kyle Anderson, Kevin Love. 7 names over 100% of the salary cap. Now you're above the cap on all your other additions, all of those rookie scale guys, any exceptions that you use, and now you're getting closer and closer to the tax line and the aprons. So if everything for Miami is about having cap space in 2026, then what we're really saying is that Miami is stuck with a mediocre roster in 2025. And as things are set right now, they do not have their first round pick in 2026. So if they bottomed out next year, they wouldn't get their own pick. Now, that might change, and I don't know if this is good radio or not, but they owe Oklahoma City their lottery protected pick this year. So if Miami misses the playoffs, then they're going to keep the pick. If they made the playoffs, they were going to send it to OKC, and then they weren't going to have to worry about any future obligation. I actually think things are maybe turning in their favor where, just keep losing games. Hopefully you jump up into the top 4. You get a great lottery pick. You get to make your fans super excited. But then guess what? Now OKC has your pick in 2026 unprotected. They say, hey, great. You guys just got the number 7 pick or the number 4 pick, let's say, in 2025. But now we get your unprotected pick in 2026. That means if the Miami Heat are the worst team in the NBA and they get the number 1 pick in 2026, it's going to the OKC Thunder. That's pretty crazy. Now, the other thing is that they owe their 2027 pick to Charlotte. And that pick is lotto protected, but then it would become unprotected in 2028. And the issue here is that it has to be 2 years between when their pick goes to OKC, then it's 2 years after that. So stay with me. Let's say Miami misses the playoffs this year. They keep their 2025 pick. Then that means no matter where the pick lands in 2026, it's going to the Thunder. Free money for the OKC Thunder. Now the clock resets so that Charlotte gets their pick in 2028 and it's unprotected. If Miami gave their pick in 2025 to OKC, then they would be permitted to send a lottery-protected 2027 pick to Charlotte. And then by 2028, they're clear. They would actually have their own pick again. We could actually talk about Miami using future draft picks in trades. But I think what's going to happen is Miami's going to keep losing games. They're going to keep their pick this spring. OKC is going to be licking their chops at wherever that pick falls for 2026. And that means Charlotte is set up to have a pick in 2028 from Miami. I think that's what's going to happen. Now, I guess indirectly that might open up their 2027 pick for a trade. But I would need to spend some time. I don't want to go on the record with all sorts of theories on that just yet. I think the harder part here is just understanding that Miami doesn't have a lot of draft capital. They have a lot of contingencies that they are on the hook for. And they have an expensive team with a mediocre talent problem. So if I sound pessimistic about Miami, it's because I'm feeling pretty pessimistic about Miami. And I'm a Bam Adebayo guy. I like Bam a lot. I don't think he is an all-NBA level player, but I think that he is definitely an all-star level player in the Eastern Conference and one of the better big men in the NBA. He has had a down season, but, Miami, this has been a pretty atrocious year for Miami in terms of vibes and in terms of confidence. I predict Bam Adebayo, age 28 next year. I think he'll have a big bounce-back season. And in some ways, what I'm asking myself is, what is the best way to build around Bam Adebayo? I think this Khalil Ware kid, who's 21 years old, very talented young big man, I think that if we can see more Bam Khalil Ware groups where, almost like Cleveland, where Bam Adebayo would be kind of like the Evan Mobley comparison, they're both kind of centers, but when you play them together, you get double the rim protection, and then they have enough skills and enough athleticism to make it work. I think that actually would be a cool direction for Miami to go, and they definitely should experiment with that in 2026. If you have enough rim protection at the 4-5 spots, then maybe you could keep Tyler Hero. But the problem is you just don't have a pathway to a competitive roster next year if Hero's making $31 million. So this is where I want to ask out loud, could we see Miami make a play for a star player in a disgruntled situation? Do they have enough to make a trade like that is a very important follow-up question. But a team that I talked about earlier this episode, the Charlotte Hornets, let's say that Charlotte, they don't get the number one pick. Maybe they land somewhere around 3, 4, 5. And they're saying to themselves, you know what? We don't think that we're even close to building a contending team. LaMelo Ball has 4 years under contract. He's exciting. He's young. He's athletic. He's a great playmaker. Like, his trade value is very high. Probably can't get much higher. Right? He'll only ever be this young right now. He'll only ever be 4 years under contract right now. And so the idea that I want to introduce, I'm not going to call this a full-blown mock trade, but what if Miami goes to Charlotte and says, Charlotte, you guys have some interesting players that you're trying to develop, but next year is going to be another rebuilding year for you guys. Might as well take some talent from us, put some lineups out there that are fun with some shooting. We'll take a long-term max salary off your books, off your hands. Don't worry about it. And we'll send you what we can in terms of draft cap. And so something like Hero, Duncan Robinson, Jaime Jaquez, that's $54.8 million going out, in exchange for LaMelo Ball and Jusuf Nurkic, that's $57.4 million coming back to Miami. Now, Miami, they're not over the second apron. They don't have those restrictions. They are a team in a position where they're going to be over the tax or certainly near the tax, but they would be able, as I mentioned earlier, they would be able to trade out of that situation in season. And I would expect them to. I would expect them to find a way to get out of the tax. And so taking on $3 million in this trade, that's perfectly legal. As long as you're within 120% of the other team's salary in a trade like that, you're totally fine. And then, if you're Charlotte, it's like, okay, so we turn LaMelo Ball into Tyler Hero. We get off that Nurkic salary. We get Jaime Jaquez, who's an interesting younger player, and Duncan Robinson, as I mentioned, owed $9.9 million, but then he could be waived, and that other $10 million is off the books, not an obligation, and is just gone. So it's kind of a creative way for Charlotte to get off of Nurkic. Nurkic is owed $19 million. That's just bad salary. That's just a bad contract. But Duncan Robinson, you complete this trade, and then you waive Duncan Robinson. That's $10 million that you get to keep. And then the question becomes, how many draft picks can Miami send to Charlotte? It appears to me, and I could be wrong, but it appears to me as of today, the only two assets they'd be allowed to send is a 2030 first-round pick swap and a 2031 first-round pick unprotected. I think that is too little to move LaMelo Ball. I don't think Charlotte would say yes to this. But as the introduction, as a fledgling concept, as an idea, that's something that Miami and Charlotte could start talking about in the offseason and explore at a later time. Sure, Duncan Robinson's contract is fully guaranteed by July 8th or July 10th. Fine. Then it's just a straight dump for dump. Duncan for Nurkic. But I think that idea could make sense for both sides if Charlotte was convinced we got to get out of the LaMelo Ball business. One other version of this, and my brother and every other Atlanta Hawks fan is going to hate me for this, but a similar concept would be Hero, Duncan Robinson, and Jaime Jaquez for Trae Young and George Niang, where basically it's about $54 million going each way, so the salaries work fine. And then again, Atlanta, you could get the 2030 pick swap and the 2031 unprotected pick from Miami. And you say, hey, we're out of the Trae Young business. We're reloading the team. We got Tyler Hero and Jaime Jaquez to soak up some of these guard minutes now that Trae's gone. We'll waive Duncan Robinson, and we'll keep things moving as a franchise. So I think that these as starting discussions or interesting discussions between teams, this is what happens, this time of year. May, June, July, for all those teams that aren't going for a championship, they got to sit around asking themselves, hey, what superstars do you think we could get in a trade? What do you think it would cost? So let me know what you think of that. In general, I really, again, appreciate all the support and all the, all the feedback for the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. Write me with any ideas for new topics, any, trades or kind of hypothetical free agency scenarios that these episodes are making you think about. Would love to discuss real questions and real, sort of suggestions on the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share my Substack, where you'll get stories on the business of basketball in addition to links to our Monday episodes. We're going to be putting out new episodes every Monday. That's our thing over here at the CBA podcast. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So with that said, I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. Thanks for listening.